Okay, so let's dive into a story the Soviet Union really wanted to keep hidden forever. We're talking about the K-27. This was supposed to be a revolutionary nuclear submarine, but its reactor was so incredibly dangerous that the only solution they could come up with was to literally entomb it and sink it to the bottom of the Arctic Ocean. Yeah, this is the story of that sunken secret. And why? Well, it might not stay buried for much longer.
And get this wasn't some tragic accident. No storm, no enemy torpedo sent this submarine to the bottom. This was a deliberate act. Soviet authorities took one of their most advanced vessels, sealed its nuclear heart in what was basically a tomb of asphalt, and then just methodically sank it in the icy depths. Wild.
So that just begs the question, right? I mean, why would a superpower deliberately sink its own brand new nuclear submarine? What could possibly make a state-of-the-art weapon so dangerous that its own creators decided the only safe place for it was the bottom of the ocean? Well, the answer lies deep inside the sub's silent, radioactive core. So right now, as we speak, sitting in the shallow, icy waters of the Kara Sea, lies the K-27. But it's not just a wreck, it's more like a nuclear ghost of the Cold War. And inside its hull, that entombed reactor is basically taking away like an environmental time bomb. This whole story really starts with this ambitious and ultimately deadly pursuit of the perfect weapon. So let's go back a bit to the 1960s. The K-27, you have to understand, wasn't just another submarine. Oh no, it was a prototype, a bold experiment designed to completely revolutionize undersea warfare. But right at its heart was a piece of tech that was as radical and powerful as it was, well, in the end, cursed. Okay, so what made it so special? Instead of using boring old pressurized water to cool its reactors, the K-27 used something way more exotic, a molten lead bismuth alloy. Sounds cool, right? This liquid metal meant the reactor could be incredibly compact and powerful, which would give the sub some seriously unprecedented speed. But, and this is a huge but, this groundbreaking technology came with a really terrible catch. I mean, it was an absolutely incredible trade-off when you think about it. The promise? A hunter-killer submarine that could outrun anything the West could throw at it. The peril? A reactor that was just dangerously unstable. See, that liquid metal coolant had to be kept hot constantly. If it cooled down, it would solidify into a solid block of metal. Game over. The smallest little impurity or temperature drop could trigger a complete catastrophe. It was a high-stakes gamble from the very beginning. And, well, on May 24th, 1968, that gamble failed. And it failed spectacularly. During a totally routine mission in the Barents Sea, the promise of the K-27 just vanished. And its dark, perilous nature was unleashed on the crew in probably the most horrific way you can imagine. And it all happened so fast. Suddenly, power in the port reactor just plummeted. The crew scrambled, trying to do an emergency shutdown, but it was already too late. Turns out, some contaminants in the liquid metal coolant created a blockage, causing the core to overheat like crazy. Lethal radioactive gases started venting directly into the reactor compartment, and from there, that invisible poison spread silently through the submarine's entire ventilation system. You know, the true horror of it all was its silence. There was no big bang, no fire, no catastrophic breach of the hull. Nothing. It was a completely invisible event. The crew had absolutely no idea they were being flooded with fatal doses of radiation until it was far too late. Within just hours, the first signs of acute radiation sickness began to show up. 9 men would end up dying from their exposure. So after the surviving crew somehow managed to restart the other reactor and limp back to port, the Soviet Navy was faced with this just unprecedented problem. They had a submarine that wasn't just crippled, it was now one of the most dangerously radioactive objects they had ever had to deal with. And they tried everything, but the situation was just hopeless. The reactor core was a fused, untouchable mass of radioactive material. Any attempt to decontaminate the vessel failed. The radiation levels were just off the charts, way too high for anyone to even get close. No one could work on it, no one could even safely board it. The K-27 had literally become a floating coffin. So after years of just sitting there, docked, a ghost ship just leaking radiation into its surroundings, the Soviet authorities made a final, really chilling decision. I guess the logic was if you can't fix it and you can't dismantle it, well, then you have to entomb it forever.
And this led to what has to be one of the strangest missions in all of naval history, the K-27's final voyage. It wasn't about warfare, it wasn't about espionage, it was about its own burial. The plan was to give this radioactive ghost a permanent grave, hiding it from the world deep beneath the Arctic ice.
Yeah, and the procedure they came up with was as methodical as it was grim. First, they towed the contaminated hulk to a remote fjord. Then, workers filled the entire reactor compartment with this mixture of furfural and bitumen. It's a special kind of asphalt that would solidify and, they hoped, seal the radioactive core for centuries. And finally, on September 6, 1982, they just opened the vents and let it sink to the bottom of the sea. And get this, in water that was barely 100 feet deep. So shallow.
And for over 40 years, that's where it has rested. Out of sight, out of mind. A Cold War secret kept by the vast, frozen expanse of the Arctic. But the ice that's been hiding the secret, it's now melting. And this story is far from over.
You see, the tomb they built for the K-27 was supposed to last forever, sealed by what they thought was the permanence of the Arctic ice. But that ice is disappearing. As the planet warms up, the steel hull of the K-27 is corroding. And scientists, they're worried it's only a matter of time before seawater finally breaches that entombed reactor. If that happens, it could create an uncontrolled chain reaction, releasing its deadly payload of uranium-235 into one of the world's most vital fishing grounds. So the question we're left with is no longer if this ticking time bomb will contaminate the Arctic, but when.